Welcome to NatureHacker Mind. I am your host, NatureHacker. So I'm going to do something a little different this time. I'm just finishing up eating, so I'm going to be taking bites while I'm talking. So it's like you're having, a dinner conversation with me. So today, I did an interview. It seemed more like an interview, but basically a debate with a guy on YouTube named Rhetoric. Now it turns out that the debate was fixed, and it was supposed to be a debate between me and him, but he had 5 of his friends join into the hangout. No idea who these people are. One of them, Red, he doesn't have a college degree, never been to college. Probably works like at a convenience store or something, and he thinks he's a rocket expert because he watches space launches at Cape Canaveral because he lives near there. So he goes there, he films it and whatnot. But in this debate, he had a friend that happened to be a scientist. So he had a scientist friend. He also had friends who seemed to be engineers. So it's just very strange that he's friends with all of these intellectual type people when he's like 15 years old or whatnot and probably didn't even graduate high school. So we had the debate, but at the end of the debate, it turns out he was like, this isn't actually on YouTube. And he's like, oh, okay. He's like, let's do that on Wednesday. And so everybody then is just like, oh, well, this isn't live. Well, I'm just leaving, So it was very strange, and I think he hurt his reputation with his friends even, that he wasted their time doing this, hour debate where it wasn't recorded, it wasn't on YouTube, wasn't live, nothing. So he's trying to reschedule on Wednesday, but he hasn't given me a time, so I don't... Hopefully that actually happens. But what the debate was about, he is a pro-NASA, anti-flat earther. So, as you know, I also am against flat earth. But I'm also against people like him who are NASA believers, Kerbal space cadets, who base their whole understanding of physics on Kerbal's space program, and think that they're now orbital mechanics, which are nothing more than video game players. So anyway, I started by talking about, we talk about how rockets don't work in space, because that's my thing. I can't really talk about my proofs against flat earth, because he's also against flat earth. So the thing that we were discussing was rockets and whether or not they work in space. So I started by saying, well, the argument that I've been using lately is that friction. So Newton's third law only works if you have friction. So in order to get an equal and opposite reaction, you have to have friction. Like if I want to throw a baseball, I have to be able to grip the ball. So if I can't grip the ball, I can't throw it. And they were all hemming and hawing, like, well, And then one guy, and then I was like, well, it's like and then one guy's like, if I'm ice skating, I can move on an ice skating rink, even though it's ice. I was like, yeah, well, that's because you put the edge of the skates stuck into the ice so you can push off. And even if you're not at a standstill, but you're kind of digging in your edge to get traction. And he's like, no, that's not how it works. And I'm like, yeah, it is. So, then he's like, you know what? I bet like my left ball or something that, which he probably doesn't have, that's why he bets it, that if he could lather up his hands. No, and then we're talking about doing a push-up on ice. I'm like, well, first thing I'm like, well, think about a hammer. You want a hammer head that has grip rather than like a smooth face of a hammer, right? Because you can more easily pound in the nail. And they're like, no, you can't. And the guy's like, I use hammers all the time, and I use the flat face ones. I'm like, well, it's easier with a hammer with some friction on it, And he's like, easier, whatever, but he's like, yeah, he's like, if, according to your theory, it wouldn't work if the hammer was flat. Alright, so I just finished eating, so anyway. The head was like smooth, and I was like, it wouldn't work if there was perfectly frictionless. I mean, you're still getting friction. Even with a flat head, So what I'm saying is that, you can compare the two, and it's easier to hammer in a nail with a friction-full head than a smooth head. So, and then I was like, it's like you can't do it's like what would be easier, to do a push-up on ice or to do a push-up on concrete? It's obviously easier to do the push-up on concrete because your hands are getting more friction. And he's like, well, doesn't matter, you could do it on either one. And I was like, well, just think of like no friction whatsoever. Your hands would just slip. You wouldn't be able to do a push-up. He's like, I would bet my left nut that I could lather up my hands in oil and go on ice and do a perfect push-up. And then everybody like laughs, and I was like, all right. So, anyway, then they bring in, I don't know, this isn't really in chronological order, but they bring in this one scientist, right, a biologist, and they're like, this guy's a biologist, and he's like, he looked at your website and stuff. I was like, oh, great, I'm a biologist too. I worked in biology for 5 years, and they're like, oh, man, you have credentials and everything, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, this guy's like, so you think that virus causes cancer? I was like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, and he's like, well, it's like there's other causes, blah, 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 or mutations and things like that, and I was like, well, yeah, sure, there's like, toxins and, chemicals, environmental chemicals, and possibly other microorganisms that also, can cause mutations, and he's like, I'm just like, he's like, but you think it's virus. I'm like, well, I think most of it's virus. Yeah, I definitely think that. And then he's like, well, what's your definition of toxin? And I was like, toxin, something that interferes with the normal process of biology. And he's like, wrong. Try again. And I was like, I don't know. What does it mean? Don't you tell me what it means. He's like, it's like from a living organism. A toxin is a poison from a living organism. I was like, okay. And he's like, you didn't know that? And I was like, well, no, I mean, that's not like biology. That's more semantics. That's more of like English than it is biology, just like definition of terms. And he's like, well, I think it's really important to know the definition. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then I was like, we were talking about chemicals and stuff, and I was like, I'm like, also chemicals and, things like you probably wouldn't think is carcinogen, but glyphosate. And he's like, ha ha ha. He's like, glyphosate is not harmful and stuff. And then everybody's like, well, what's glyphosate? And he's like, Roundup. And everybody's like, okay. Like, now I got this guy arguing pro Monsanto, which is a pretty unpopular position. So I just kind of threw this guy to the curb, Didn't even try to, but it just happened. So then that guy was out of the ring. So then what they did was, at the end there was a girl there, and she's like, so where, if the rockets, don't go into space, where do they go? I was like, well, the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean right there. And then they're all talking like, oh, what do we, blah blah, and then the main dude, Red, is like,
he's like, so you think the entire rocket goes in the ocean? Like, well, I'm like, well, I'm like, the nose, whatever, could possibly go into orbit. I'm not going to go against that. I mean, that's possible, but I don't really know. It doesn't really matter to my theory whether or not it goes into orbit. I do think the satellites exist, and rockets don't need to work in space for satellites to get up there. And so anyway, he's like, but you have no proof that. He's like, do you have any proof that the rockets go in the ocean? I was like, well, yeah, there's a lot of pieces of rockets that have, been beached and stuff on islands and things in the Pacific Ocean, or sorry, in the Atlantic Ocean, and they're rumbling, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, and then he's like, do you have any reason to believe that the nose or whatever ends up there? I was like, well, I've seen one picture of a nose on one of these these trash islands of all this rocket debris, and he's like, oh, but that's just a nose cone. He's like, yeah, but the things inside of it could have came out. I was like, okay, fine, like, doesn't really matter. I mean, whether or not that happens and that piece goes somewhere else, maybe in orbit, I don't know. Who knows? And it doesn't really matter to me because it has nothing to do with my theory. My theory is just that no rockets they don't go into outer space. Everything just stays in lower Earth orbit. I don't believe in geostationary orbits, etc. So, and then the girl is like, oh, well, you said that everything goes into the ocean, and that's just like that. That just proves that you're just unreliable. You're lying or something. I was like, look, we were talking about, you just said just the rocket in general, where does it go? She's like, but you didn't specify the nose goes in a different direction or something. I was like, you never asked. I mean, it's like, we didn't get that specific about what parts go where and everything. So she's just trying to pin me on that. It's just really pathetic. And what else happened? There's another guy that jumped in for a second. I mean, he asked a good question. I can't remember what it was, and I think I was able to explain it. But so then we're talking about the rocket nozzle, and I'm like, okay, well, look, when you have, the rocket works because there's a column of gas ejecting. So it's ejecting the gas all in one direction, I'm saying. So what's happening is that the atmosphere is confining the exhaust into a nice straight column. And when you have a nice straight column, you're pushing the gas away from you in a straight line away from you. So you're going to get a reactionary force. But without that atmospheric pressure, the gas goes out in all directions and the forces all cancel each other, so it's not doing any work. And they're like, well, all of the work is done in the nozzle. And I'm like, well, the work can't be done in the nozzle. And an idea I just got now is that if the work was done in the nozzle, that means that you could plug the nozzle, and then that mass that was the gas that was moving inside the nozzle would hit against the block or whatever you put in front of the nozzle, and it would, you attach a block onto the back of the nozzle, so it seals the nozzle up. That gas that was moving inside the nozzle would hit that sealed end of the chamber and now bounce the rocket backwards or whatever. But that doesn't happen, In a sealed chamber, what happens is any type of pressure is just equalized throughout the entire chamber. It's not going to push the chamber in one direction. It's like lifting yourself up by your bootstraps. You can't do it. So we were going on that a lot, and they're like, well, it doesn't matter because, it does all the work in the nozzle. It's going in the direction in the nozzle. But I was like, as soon as it comes out, it's going off in free expansion. And I was like, according to Newton's third law, you have to have a body external to the system to be able to apply a force to. You know, you have to have a body outside the system. And when you're in the nozzle, you're still inside that system. You have to apply it outside the system. And as soon as the gas leaves the nozzle, it's under free expansion in space. But in the atmosphere, it would be in that column, and it would be forced to go in the direction away, and that would create thrust. And I was like, look, you can prove this because, you know, have you ever heard of an under and overexpanded nozzle? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I was like, in an underexpanded nozzle, all of the gas goes out, you know, at like right angles basically. And what happens is the more underexpanded the nozzle, the less thrust you get. And they're like, oh, less efficiency. I was like, yeah, sure, less efficiency. So I was like, so that proves that, you know, you have to be applying that. The gas has to be moving away constantly to get maximum thrust. You know, so if it's going off at right angles, you know, it's not the work that's done in the nozzle, it's the work that's done outside of the nozzle, and that agrees with Newton's third law that it has to be a force applied to an external body. So we went on that a lot. And then the girl was like, so you believe in Bigfoot, but you don't believe in SpaceX and stuff? I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I totally believe in Bigfoot. I was like, you should check out my website. I have a nice article on it. And she's like, yeah, I saw it. You know, got a good laugh out of that. And one of the guys is like, you know, he's like, you think that the Bigfoot's foot is just totally flat like that, like a flat slipper? I was like, well, yeah, I think it's flat and had toes on it and everything, so I don't see any reason why it being flat was a negative aspect of it. I think that could very well be the way it is, and you know, a lot of primates and stuff have pretty much flat feet. That's just the way apes are. So, but and then they're talking about that. Oh, and then we were talking about the SpaceX footage, so the landing, and so Red had been obviously watching my videos, and watching my my website, and seeing that I claimed somewhere that I thought that Operation Bluebeam could have been used to make the a light show, basically, that a ball was falling. But I didn't quite let him just go straight there. I was like, he was like, what do you think? You know, was explanation for that. I was like, well, you know, I don't know. It was just a ball of light. You know, there was no rocket. It was just a ball of light. You know, there was no rocket visible. And he's like, there was a rocket visible. You'd go watch the video again. I was like, all right, you know, I'll watch it again. But, you know, I didn't see any rocket there. And I just watched it again just recently. And, yeah, there was zero rocket there whatsoever. So, and then another thing that proves my flare thought is that in Red's video of the landing, I don't remember, was it Fiona 9 or something, or it was Falcon 9 landing, that there was two balls of light. There was a first ball of light, and then it petered out, and then a second ball of light came up. The first ball of light, you could see the smoke going up at, you know, an angle upwards. You know, it's like it was definitely a flare. It was just a flare because you see the smoke coming off of it as it's coming down, and then it dies out, and you can literally see the light shrink into this little ball and then go out. I mean, it was obviously 100% a flare. So that was a flare. I mean, that is proven. And so now I look back at it, I'm like, wow, I should have really pounded that home, because that is beyond a doubt. So, but anyway, I was like, yeah, you know, it could be a flare. And he's like, well, so what if it's a flare? He's like, but what do you really think it is? I was like, well, you know, it could be many things, you know. I think that, you know, some of it could have been Operation Bluebeam, you know, using lasers to make a light show. He's like, so you think it's a hologram? I was like, well, you know, we could have used lasers or something, you know, look up Operation Bluebeam to do that. And that was in the 90s that theory came out. So, anyway, but yeah, I mean, another thing looking at it now is that, that ball, the second ball, falls so fast that it basically hits the ground at what looks to be like at least 50 miles an hour. So there's no way that that was a rocket landing. And there was not a rocket. I mean, even when that quote-unquote landed, still there's no rocket visible from all the flame reflecting off the ground and reflecting onto the rocket. There was no rocket visible. So it was totally bogus. Do I know what that second part was? I don't. But it looked like there was some sorts of exhaust flames coming out at certain points, and so that's a little hard to explain, because if it was just a flare, we wouldn't see any like flames coming out, you know, like a downward flame. We definitely wouldn't see that, but we saw that in his video. So I don't really know how to explain that 100%. It could be blue beam, it could be a combination of blue beam and a flare. But yeah, but what I was going to say is that flame, that rocket exhaust flame that was coming out of the bottom, I mean, that's the rocket firing, right? So you would assume that it would be loud, a lot like with the rocket launch, but there was no sound whatsoever. And even over time, as you know, it would take a few seconds to get the sound to come all that way. It never showed up. The sound never showed up. So that's a big issue on that front. So that's a lot of the stuff that we talked about. We talked about joule-free expansion, but then they're like, oh, but it accelerates in the nozzle before it can expand. So, I mean, that's a kind of a difficult theory it's difficult to explain and to think about, and hopefully I'll get some more breakthrough on that thought. But yeah, so that was my conversation with Red's Rhetoric. So, you know, if you ever want to go to his channel and check out my comments there and support me and whatnot, hopefully Wednesday this goes through when I'll actually get a debate on his channel with him. So that would be great. You know, it would probably bring more subscribers, more traffic here, and build up the community that we have together. So that's always good. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't trust him because, you know, we had a debate and then it ends up, oh, let's schedule the real one for Wednesday. I was like, wait, I thought we were having a debate here, and, you know, that kind of implies that it would go on YouTube. Like, I wouldn't have come on and done a debate with you if it was just going to be between you and your friends and nobody see it. You know, it's a waste of my time, really. I'm not here to try to convince his little group of friends that they are lemmings, but whatever. I mean, hopefully it works out for the best, and hopefully I got through to some of his lemming friends, and hopefully this kid keeps his word that we will actually do a real one on Wednesday. So looking forward to that, I suppose. I'm going to take another look over all of my Rockets in Space videos so that I can kind of study up on all of the arguments that I have developed over time. There's a lot of them. So maybe I'll bring up my hose in a bucket example, so that can also help illustrate my point, which was, I believe, in part 7 or 8 of my Rockets Don't Work in Space videos. So that took up a lot of my day today, and I've just been really out of energy today. I had some orders on my website, or one order, reasonably big order, and I need to get that shipped out. I bought that over the weekend, but I just didn't get to it today. I woke up at like 4 in the morning and checking my email, I see this breaking story from the health ranger, who is a great guy, by the way. Health ranger, nature hacker, very similar, very amazing. So great guy there, and he alerts me that, well, he's not talking to me directly, but just his article, that CBD, cannabidiol, is now outlawed. And before it was just THC was outlawed, and you could use CBD as a supplement, you know, because it has no psychoactive effects. It's not a drug or anything. It's not scheduled, so it was totally legal, and you could use it for supplements and whatnot. So, but there's a problem, and that problem is that there's a new law in town, and that law in the FDA is that if Big Pharma starts doing research on a natural chemical for a drug, using it for a drug, even if it never uses it as a drug, that now means that since they started researching it, that now that ingredient can no longer be used in supplements. So if they start researching resveratrol, which is, in grape skins or whatnot, grapes, that means that you can no longer sell resveratrol supplements. And not only can you no longer sell resveratrol supplements, if you sell grape extract, or even just grape, dried grape powder or something, if it has resveratrol in it, that is now illegal and you can't sell it. How crazy is that? So they could make dried grapes illegal to sell because it has resveratrol in it, and resveratrol is being studied by Big Pharma as a potential drug. And they don't even have to get it approved. All they have to do is spend enough money. So they did this already with 2 vitamins. They did it with the active form of with B6 and B9. Okay, so B6 and then B9 is folic acid. So folic acid is not biologically active. And in fact, folic acid acts as an allergen. So there's an actual active form called tetramethylhydrofolate. Now, Big Pharma did some research on it, and now it is illegal to sell the active form. You have to sell the allergen folic acid. You cannot sell the tetramethylhydrofolate, which is the active form. You can't sell that. So that's just a total blow. It's like, you can't even have a necessary vitamin. It's just insane. And then they did the same thing with B6. They found, the type of B6 that's biologically active, the best type, and then they did 100 million. Here's what they did. They set up a company, okay? They gave this company $100 million. The company did research on it, used up its $100 million, and said, oops, we ran out of money. And the FDA is like, oh, that's okay. We'll still just make it illegal for any supplement manufacturers to make that form of B6. So they spend $100 million and they basically torpedo an essential vitamin, B6. So we can't even sell the best form of it. So they're not going to use it. I mean, they did this on purpose. They set up a fake front company, did the research, and then scrapped it so that they didn't waste too much money, because they don't want to market it as a drug. They just want to make it so that supplement manufacturers can't sell it because it would cure too many people. So that's where we're at, and it's very, very insane. And this is just the top tip of the iceberg. This is the canary in the coal mine. They've already done it on 3 products. They've done it on B6, B9, and cannabidiol. They're coming for all of it. And what they can do is, there's a lot of chemicals out there that are in many, many plants. So let's say I take, if they did this, I would probably move out of the country. But they could take triterpenoid saponins, the active ingredient in things that combat adrenal fatigue. They could do this to triterpenoid saponins and make it so that a whole class of adaptogen herbs, like 100 different herbs, would now be illegal. So it's just absolutely insane what they could do with this and where they could go with it. And we're in trouble, ladies and gentlemen. They could do it with vitamin D, possibly. They could do it with any supplement that you can think of. All they have to do is throw $100 million at it, and then boom, it gets torpedoed, and no longer can you use that supplement. And And like I said, a lot of these things, they could kill 100 birds with one stone. They research a chemical that's in 100 different plants, and now all of those plants are now illegal to sell because they contain that chemical in it. So it's absolutely insane. And if this keeps going on like this, I'm gonna have to leave. I mean, I'm gonna have to do something. I'm gonna have to go on an Indian reservation and try to be an apprentice, work with a native healer, or go into Mexico, find a shaman to live under and whatever, live in the forest with a shaman. Who knows? But I'm not going to live my life in slavery, not able to do the work that I'm called to do. The work that I'm designed by God to do this herbalism work and to heal humanity. And if they try to prevent me from doing that, I'm gone. I'm out of here. And I'm going to fight this while I'm here. I'm going to fight as hard as I can, raising awareness, doing whatever I can to fight this absolute health Gestapo in the FDA and what they're doing in collusion with Big Pharma. So, thanks for listening to Nature Hacker Mind, and I will see you tomorrow.